like, why were some of these accounts disputed when there's no reason for some of these accounts being disputed? So you really have to just be able to understand not everything needs to be disputed. If it's not causing any harm, there's no negative data, just leave it be. Okay, don't worry about it. Okay, we're only focused on negatives. Okay, negative inquiries, derogatory accounts, things of that nature. Let's talk about who are the credit bureaus, right? So obviously, when we think about credit bureaus, we think, man, they've got a lot of power, right? These guys got a lot of power, but they are not federal agencies. They are actually for-profit corporations that make billions of dollars by selling our data, okay? But there is a federal agency, government agency that does kind of, make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is the CFPB. And that's where you want to go. We talk about this all the time. If you have, something that has not been resolved, if you haven't filed a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we certainly can. And even if you plan to start a credit repair business, oftentimes the CFPB complaint is best filed by the consumer because they already can tell if, they think that this is a fake email address. Because what happens is you get a virtual assistant to help you with your credit repair business, right? They will set up a separate email account usually to do all of the credit communications since there's so much of it. And, you're filing complaints with the CFPB and all of that good stuff. But if the CFPB thinks that this is not their real email address, the consumer's real email address, they're just going to mark it as spam anyways, and they're not going to process the claim. So it's more effective if you have the clients file the CFPB complaint from their end, from their IP address. You can just give them the verbiage. Here, copy and paste this into the complaint, fill out your information, and let me know how it goes. That's best, right? You also have the big three, which are TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. Those are the main players right there. Those are the big three. Now, we all know there's a ton of third-party data furnishers out there. I'm not going to cover all of those, but I've dropped those inside of the school app, and you can certainly opt out of there. And if you do have a bankruptcy, you'll certainly want to have your clients opt out of LexisNexis, but also you're going to need to dispute the bankruptcy with LexisNexis. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. Consumer report. Okay. Now, whenever you are helping someone with the credit, first thing that you're going to ask them for is their credit reports, right? I can't tell you how many times I have talked to somebody and I, ask them about their credit report and it's painted one picture, right? And I'm like, oh, well, that's not that bad. No worries. Send me your login credentials. Let me check it out, man. All right. Login. It paints a completely different story. Okay. So it's best to just use what is factual, and that's the data that's on the credit report. Whether or not it's accurate or it's not, that's the data that we're dealing with at this time, right? So it's our job to make sure that, hey, if that data is affecting somebody in a negative manner, whether it's true or not, let's go through the dispute process to see if we can get it off, right? Just because it comes off doesn't mean the debt's leaved or anything like that, because we never know what can happen in the future, right? But as long as it's not on the consumer report, we're fine, right? They just won't be able to go back to the bank that they have bad blood with, because that bank is still going to have internal records about negative accounts with them. For example, I had bad blood with Discover in the past. I can't go back to them and I don't want to. So, even if you have bad blood with Capital One, there's a ton of other places out there that you can do business with. We just have to start building those relationships with some of the banks that we may have never heard of, like Navy Federal. I've never heard of them before I got into this credit space, but they have been one of the best banks, and they have helped me add comparable credit to my profile to be able to get higher limits with other banks. And in fact, I had bad blood with Chase, but I ended up settling with them because I knew I wanted to go back to them in the future. And that was one of the smartest things that I ever did, because I went back to them 4 years later and got a personal and a business credit card with them. So it's really important to be able to, understand if you do have bad blood with like American Express or Navy Federal, and you're like, man, I do want to go back to them in the future, you're going to have to settle with them. And they understand things happen, right? And that's why a lot of times they are willing to settle with you. They are willing to work with you. But just know it's going to take 4 years or so to get back into their good grace and to truly show them that, hey, I went through this. This is no representation of my character. It just happened to be a rough time, but that's over, and good times are to come. You can also look up consumer law. Consumer law is going to be super helpful when it comes to credit repair, because you can say, look, have there been other cases out there where a consumer went through the same scenario and there was a lawsuit? And here's some examples of that. I'm not going to be going over everything in all of these presentations, but I always put the slideshows for you guys to review later, because there's so much information in here. And honestly, a lot of times what I do when I'm disputing is I just use parts of the law, and I put it into ChatGPT.